What happens when a country finally decides it's tired of playing dress-up in someone else's clothes? Burkina Faso just threw a massive wrench in the whole colonial hangover, ditching the ridiculous wigs and gowns that have been clinging to the country's legal system like a bad fashion trend. But this isn't about fashion, is it? No, it's about power, pride, and throwing colonialism out the door. Imagine for a second, what if your whole legal system was dressed in the same outfits used by the people who once ruled over you? Feels ridiculous, right? Well, that's exactly what Burkina Faso just dumped. But here's the thing. This decision isn't just about style. It's about Africa finally saying, we're done with this nonsense. It's a powerful rejection of the colonial mindset that's been ingrained into the African psyche for far too long. But what does it mean? Let's find out. Let's break this down. Control is the key here. Colonialism wasn't just about taking over land, it was about taking over minds, customs, and traditions. The colonizers didn't just dictate who owned the land, they imposed their values, their ways of life, and yes, their clothes. And what better way to ensure that the colonized people feel they're under control than by forcing them into the same attire that was worn by their oppressors? Doesn't it send a message when a government still expects its judges and legal professionals to wear the same wigs and gowns used by the colonial powers that subjugated them? For decades, African countries have been stuck wearing the clothes of their colonizers. Wigs, gowns, and robes are all symbols of authority meant to reinforce the dominance of the colonial system. These garments weren't just about fashion or practicality. They were a tool of psychological control. When the judges wore these garments, it wasn't just a costume, it was a signal to the people that they were still living under a system dictated by foreign powers, whether they had gained formal independence or not. It's beyond ridiculous. It's like forcing someone to wear their parents' clothes from the 1980s because they're respectable or proper, even though they've long gone out of style. It's absurd. You'd think that after gaining independence, African nations would toss those colonial uniforms into the trash. But no. Decades later, in some countries, the same wigs and robes are still worn in courts as if they somehow represent the legitimacy of the legal system. They don't. They just represent the last remnants of colonial rule. Let's look at other examples of this lingering colonial influence. In Kenya, for instance, judges still wear the traditional British judicial wig as part of their formal attire. Ghana and Zimbabwe are no different. Despite their hard-won independence, these nations still cling to colonial practices, often citing tradition and the idea that such symbols uphold the respectability and professionalism of the judiciary. But think about it. What does that say about the mindset of a nation? How can a country truly be free if it still wears the chains of colonial influence in the form of outdated, foreign garments? Now, here comes Burkina Faso, ripping up that script with the force of a movement that has been brewing for years. It's not just a legal attire shift, it's an all-out cultural and psychological revolution. Burkina Faso is saying, enough with the colonial hangover, we're done with the costumes. They've thrown away the wigs and gowns like an old, embarrassing high school yearbook photo. And the message is loud and clear. We don't need to wear your clothes to be legit. It's a revolution not just in the courtroom, but in the mindset of the entire nation. It's a resounding declaration of independence, pride, and the refusal to continue being defined by foreign standards. This isn't just a superficial change. It's an act of defiance against centuries of oppression that sought to silence the African voice and erase African identity. The colonial past wasn't just about stealing land, it was about stripping Africans of their cultural identity, their traditions, and their dignity. It wasn't enough to control the land, they had to control how Africans viewed themselves. When you force someone to wear your clothes, it's like telling them they can never be good enough in their skin, that their native identity doesn't matter. But Burkina Faso isn't just following the script that colonial powers wrote for them, they're writing their own story, a story where African pride and identity come first. And this move is more than just symbolic, it's practical. It's about looking at the future and saying, we can create our systems. We can build our own culture. We don't need you to define what's professional or worthy. And by rejecting these colonial symbols, They're opening the door for the rest of Africa to do the same. But hold on, this is just the beginning. Sure, it's bold, but it's part of a much bigger movement. This isn't just about legal attire. This is about Africa taking ownership of its systems, its own culture, and its destiny. So let's take a step back and think about it. Why does Burkina Faso's decision to reject colonial wigs and gowns matter beyond the courtroom? First, let's talk about cultural impact. Burkina Faso isn't just rejecting the colonial mindset within the legal system. They're challenging the entire framework of cultural and social norms that were imposed by the colonizers. When you see judges in locally made attire, it's not just a symbol of African pride. It's a reminder that the country can thrive on its terms. For too long, the global narrative has been that African systems, cultures, and even economies needed to follow the West's lead. Burkina Faso's move says, no more. They're flipping the script, and that's inspiring a whole new way of thinking. It's more than just wearing traditional clothes. It's about rebuilding African self-confidence. When you reclaim your traditions, you start to reclaim your identity, your values, and your strength. By embracing local culture, Burkina Faso is leading by example, showing that African nations don't have to conform to foreign standards to be modern or successful. This shift has the power to inspire other nations to start looking inward, reflecting on their cultural practices and finding ways to incorporate their heritage into modern life. Now, let's get into economics, because this decision is going to hit the economy hard in the best way possible. Burkina Faso's move to replace imported legal attire with locally sourced clothing isn't just a symbolic gesture, it's a boost for local industries. Specifically, the textile sector stands to gain big time. The country is making a deliberate choice to invest in homegrown industries, which could have a profound impact on job creation and economic sustainability. The textile industry is a key area where Burkina Faso can reduce its reliance on imports and start building self-sufficiency. Right now, many African countries, including Burkina Faso, are still heavily dependent on foreign-made goods. But by choosing locally produced garments, Burkina Faso is effectively saying, we don't need your imports. We've got the talent and the resources to make our own. This isn't just about clothes. The impact extends far beyond the textile industry. More demand for locally made fabrics means more work for local artisans, farmers, and businesses. The ripple effect touches everything from agriculture to infrastructure. Why? Because when you start making clothes locally, you need cotton from local farmers, you need factories to process the fabric, and you need workers to produce the garments. The money stays within the country, boosting the local economy and creating new opportunities. Look at Kenya, for example. The country has made huge strides in the textile industry over the past decade. The government has implemented policies that prioritize locally produced goods, especially in the fashion sector. As a result, Kenya's textile industry has been booming, creating jobs, increasing exports, and boosting the local economy. This success story is proof that investing in local production can pay off in a big way. And guess what? Burkina Faso is in a perfect position to do the same. But it doesn't stop there. This isn't just a money-making move. It's about reclaiming control over the country's economic future. By focusing on local production, Burkina Faso is sending a powerful message to the world. We're not relying on imports anymore. We can stand on our own 2 feet. This shift in mindset is crucial for Africa as a whole. For too long, African countries have been viewed as markets for Western products rather than producers of their goods. Burkina Faso is changing that narrative, and other nations are starting to take notice. This movement is more than just about local production. It's about empowerment. It's about giving local communities the tools, resources, and opportunities they need to thrive. It's about shifting the narrative from dependence to self-reliance. When Burkina Faso chooses to support local industries, it's not just about selling garments. It's about creating a framework for long-term economic growth and stability. This is how African economies can build a foundation for the future, one that doesn't rely on the whims of foreign powers or imports. But what's even more exciting is that this move is part of a larger, continent-wide push for decolonization. Burkina Faso is not the only one rejecting colonial symbols and practices. Across Africa, there's a growing movement to reject everything from colonial languages to colonial legal systems. Burkina Faso's decision to ditch the colonial wigs is a powerful part of this larger movement, and it's a call to action for other African countries to start looking inward and reclaiming their cultural, economic, and political sovereignty. Now, the question is what this means for the whole of Africa. Let's get real here. This isn't just about a bunch of wigs and gowns. Sure, on the surface, it might look like a simple wardrobe change for judges, but it's a symbolic moment of seismic proportions for the entire continent. This is Africa taking the reins of its own future. It's a bold declaration. We are no longer defined by our colonizers' standards. We define ourselves. Think about it. Colonial powers didn't just control Africa's resources. They dictated what was acceptable, what was prestigious, and yes, even what people should wear. From education systems to legal frameworks, the colonialists imposed their values on a continent they sought to dominate. And for far too long, African nations have been playing catch-up, wearing the same borrowed clothes literally and figuratively, while being told their own ways weren't civilized enough. But Burkina Faso is saying, enough. The decision to reject these colonial symbols, wigs and gowns, goes beyond fashion. It's a statement of independence. This isn't just about looking different, it's about acting differently. Africa has been held back for so long by these foreign standards and systems. The structures put in place by colonial powers are still holding a grip on the continent, affecting everything from governance to education, from law enforcement to international relations. And let's be honest, it's time for a change. Burkina Faso's bold move is like a ripple in the pond that will eventually reach the shores of every African nation. It's part of a growing realization that Africa doesn't need to copy the West to thrive. It needs to embrace its solutions, its systems, and its own culture. This isn't just a courtroom fashion statement, it's a cultural revolution. By rejecting these colonial remnants, Burkina Faso is signaling that Africa is imitating the West. It's time for African nations to define themselves and move forward on their terms. But let's get into the meat of this. What does this decision mean beyond the symbolism of the courtroom? It's a bold leap toward African self-sufficiency. Think about the impact on the economy. Burkina Faso's decision to replace foreign-made attire with locally produced clothing could ignite a domino effect across the continent. Local industries, from textiles to agriculture, will thrive as demand for homegrown products increases. Why should Burkina Faso and Africa as a whole depend on the West for imports when they have the resources, the talent, and the raw materials to create their own? This is Africa's chance to break free from the economic systems that were imposed on it. Systems that made the continent a supplier of raw materials and a market for Western products. It's about economic sovereignty, and it starts with something as simple as switching out colonial attire. But don't be fooled. This is no small thing. This is about Africa creating its future, no longer bound by the chains of colonialism. Now let's get into the political implications. You see, rejecting colonial symbols isn't just about independence in name, it's about real political freedom. Burkina Faso's rejection of colonial legal attire is part of a wider trend of decolonization. But this decolonization isn't just happening in the form of legal attire. It's happening in African political systems too. Africa is beginning to reject the Western-imposed governance systems that were designed to benefit former colonizers, not Africans. From the rise of the African Union to Pan-African movements, there's a growing political consciousness that Africa needs to stand on its own feet. By taking control of their legal systems and cultures, African nations like Burkina Faso are writing a new political narrative. No longer will Africa's political systems be dictated by foreign powers. The colonial legacy that shaped the way African governments function is being dismantled piece by piece. This is the political independence that Africa has long dreamed of, and now it's becoming a reality. Burkina Faso's decision isn't just a local move, it's a spark that could set the entire continent on fire. What happens next? More nations will follow suit. Decolonization is no longer just a theory. It's a tangible movement that's gaining momentum, and it's happening in real time. What's happening in Burkina Faso is about more than cultural pride, legal systems, or economic shifts. It's about Africa asserting its place in the world as a self-sustaining, self-defining continent. So what's next for Africa? More decolonization, more self-sufficiency, and a whole lot more pride in who they are. Burkina Faso is showing that Africa doesn't need to keep looking to the West for validation. It's time for Africa to define itself in the 21st century, not by the standards of its colonizers, but by its values, systems, and traditions. The future is African, and it's about damn time. Now, Burkina Faso and its current leader, Ibrahim Traoré, absolutely deserve credit for the bold decision to reject colonial-era legal attire. It might seem like a simple change in wardrobe at first glance, but the significance goes much deeper. This isn't just about replacing wigs and gowns. It's about Burkina Faso asserting its independence from colonial legacies that have lingered far too long in African institutions. Since Traoré came to power, he has consistently championed national sovereignty and cultural pride. His decision to push for this symbolic yet powerful move is indicative of a larger vision, one that places Burkina Faso at the forefront of a broader decolonization movement that stretches beyond just political independence. Traoré has made it clear that Burkina Faso will no longer wear the chains of colonial influence. By ditching the colonial legal attire, he's sending a message not only to Burkina Faso's citizens, but to the entire African continent. It's time to move forward on our terms. This decision wasn't made lightly, especially considering how deeply entrenched colonial symbols have been in African legal systems. These garments were once a status symbol, a visible reminder of European power and authority. For African nations to break free from that requires not just political change, but a fundamental shift in mindset. And this is exactly what Traoré is spearheading. Traoré's leadership is about more than just rejecting outdated symbols. It's about reclaiming control over Burkina Faso's future and empowering the people to embrace their own identity. This bold action positions Burkina Faso as a leader in Africa's ongoing battle for cultural and political freedom. In a continent still grappling with the aftermath of colonial rule, Burkina Faso is showing the world that it's time for Africa to define itself, not be defined by others. For taking this monumental step, Traoré deserves immense recognition. He's not just addressing the practical needs of his country, he's making an impactful statement that ripples across Africa, inspiring other nations to break free from colonial chains and start building their future. What other colonial symbols do you think should be discarded in Africa's pursuit of cultural and political independence? Let us know in the comments section. Do you think this is enough, or does Africa need to do more? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.